Akkor nem kell leállítani, ha is
Mike, what questions would you have?
I was wondering what it was.
Tough questions.
It's
Okay.
tough, but
Which one would you like to start with answering?
What was the
The middle class.
the middle group? Well, actually, one of the things I keep talking about Anya, and I must say she's sort of my patron saint. She talked about the working class, the bottom 50th percentile, and the middle class, according to her rough definition, was the 50th to the 90th percentile in income. And very much to my surprise, she found that the middle class schools were very much like the working class schools in what the teachers were doing. The difference was that in middle class schools, the kids were cooperating. They were copying notes from the board. These children were they copied the notes from the board. They studied them. They had in their minds at 5th grade, these kids talked about going to a good college. They knew that there were good colleges, not just, the working class kids didn't even know who knew about college. I mean, there are some, but we're not going to them. These kids knew that there were good colleges and bad colleges, and they knew and they talked about the fact that their grades in 5th grade were going to count. So they cooperated with the teachers, although she found very much the same kind of methods. There was more, not a whole lot more negotiation, but more. I mean, in a middle class school, you would not find a teacher saying to a kid, "That's an interesting question, but we're copying notes for tomorrow's test." As the teacher who cut the kid off when she wanted to talk about what causes alcoholism. But the methods were very similar. The children's reaction to those methods were different, in that the middle class cooperated. So you don't get. I found that the schools that my children went to. I mean, they were considered very good schools. When I moved to Buffalo, I was told, I came to Buffalo to teach at the university, and I was told to move in. I mean, colleagues, my new colleagues, or colleagues to be, when I was first coming here, said, "You got to move into Williamsville because that's the best school system in the district." I didn't find I found a bunch of really nice teachers and so on. I didn't find anything remarkable at all about the kind of education, the kind of methods they were using. My daughter, the longest paper she wrote in high school was not for an English teacher, it was for a history teacher. I don't remember that they did a lot of writing at all. But they were going to school with kids. The reason it was considered such a great school, they were going to school with kids whose parents were at the university or at the medical center, the medical hospital, or so we were all people who really understood. We were really, education was our lives, and they were going to school with like children, and they did go to very good colleges. I mean, it was true enough, but there was nothing that remarkable about the difference between they were taught and the way I was taught. The difference was with the school I went to, most of the kids weren't paying attention and giving the teacher trouble.
Okay. Now the other question is that, so what needs to be done in the system?
The system, well, the system. What needs to be is the status quo needs to be changed. The system needs to be changed, and where I'm coming from right now is, and I really hadn't figured all this out when I wrote the book, but as I said earlier, I think the last the site of the, the final struggle, so to speak, for real equality in America. And when I say equality, by the way, I don't mean that everybody now will have the same salary. I'm not particularly a socialist. I wish we could make our system fairer. I wish we could make our system one where people at the bottom were getting a hell of a lot better break than they're getting right now. And that would take some protection for them. It would take such things as higher minimum wage, stronger unions, better government-sponsored health care, and that sort of thing, which limits the economy, which limits the sort of laissez-faire capitalism that says, as soon as you start talking about minimum wage, you're talking about limiting how the economy works, and I understand that. But I think that's really where it's at, is those social issues that people are not getting their fair share, and
That's the broader
in the broader society,
yeah.
right? And
School system.
and I think the people who are suffering have to do what they need to do. And just as and that is the parents of these children. It's an interesting thing that when people were fighting for civil rights, it was the people who wanted those rights who were doing the fighting, adults, who were feeling that their meetings were being broken up, and they were getting arrested for sedition for sitting in a tavern with 5 people talking about, the king or something, saying bad things. They're fighting for these rights they want for themselves. The interesting, what is kind of really makes this more complicated is that the place that the struggle is now is in the classroom, because, and this is a little complicated, the thing that limits the working class now is their poor education. But they get their education when they're children, not when they're adults. So the children can't fight for their rights. They don't understand. You can't explain this to them. And the parents, so it leaves the parents. So the parents are not fighting for rights that they're immediately going to profit from. They're fighting for rights for their children. So it's the fighters are one step removed from the reward. And it is not until you get an educated group of middle class or working class kids, better educated, more powerfully educated, to take over the battle. So you see what I mean? It makes it more complicated. You've got to convince the parents to fight for what the kids. But I do think it's the parents have to do it. And just as working class people in the say from 1850 to 1950, they knew they were getting beat up badly, but they didn't know how to. And who put them together? It was labor organizers. A lot of them came up from the middle class. That very talented kind of man or woman who could organize, and a lot of them were middle class people who were allies of theirs. So you had this character appear in on the American scene, and it's the organizer, the labor organizer. And that man or woman went out and said and got the people together and tried to explain to them, tried to conscientize them in a Freudian sense about what's the problem here and what you can do about it. And nobody else is going to do it. It's your problem. Nobody else is essentially going to be able to do it. And that's how they did it. I think there has to be that kind of organizer that goes out among parents and says, just like they said to the laboring people 50 and 100 years ago, I can help you understand what's going on here, and I can help you figure out how to fight for something better. That kind of person, and they are appearing. That kind of person is appearing. There are, people who are organizing parents, and getting results, and so that's my hope for changing the system. But changing a system, if you look at the history of labor, and you see, it's not something you do overnight. But I believe it's beginning, and that's where I see hope.
Okay, I got what I want for the time being. Is there anything else important which any one of you want to be asked?
Well, the subtitle of the book is "Helping Working Class, Educating Working Class Children in Their Own Self-Interest," and what I mean by that, as a matter of fact, my original subtitle was "Educating Working Class Children Like Rich Children, comma, in Their Own Self-Interest," but the publisher thought that was too long. But that's what I mean. It's I think the difference between working class education and the education of the middle and the upper class is that the middle and upper classes are educated in their self-interest. The kids understand that. They know why they're reading Faulkner.
Whereas
they know they even if they don't, they may know a very crass thing, and that is, if I get a good grade on this, I'm going to go to a good college. I'm going to go to a good college. I'm going to get a good job, and then I'm going to have a good house, and so on and so forth. But they're motivated to do what the teacher tells them to do, and they understand that this is my self-interest to do this. Working class kids do not see that what they're being asked to do is in their self-interest. They see that it's in somebody else's interest, or they don't see any point to it at all. If they do, they see that. I doubt that they even see that what people are trying to do is to make them more, better Christians and better citizens. Or, I guess saying better Christians is getting a little passé with the diversity we have in the country today, but more religious, more domesticated people, to make them manageable and productive for other people. So, I mean, what I'm talking about is educating them in their self-interest. And what's their self-interest? It's to get these better social conditions for themselves, to alleviate some of the really nightmare stories, the conditions that some people have to live in, and to generally elevate the quality of life for the huge numbers of people. And the trick is, though, that whereas middle class and upper class kids at some level understand what's in their self-interest, these working class kids don't understand what education has to do with their self-interest. And that's the trick. That's what we've got to do now, and that's where I think we've got to organize parents and go through relive the whole history of organizing labor to get a better deal for people.
Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Careful the lights.
Going to one is that look at me, not at the camera. I don't know.
Okay.
As opposed to live television when you're supposed to look sometimes at the camera. The other thing is that I'm like a little child. I need full completed.
I'll go around the other way.
Okay, so we talked a lot, as you noticed with Patrick. So
I don't have that much to say, so it'll be shorter.
we don't have any more things. No, but and we talked among others the empowering education and domesticated education. And first, I would like to ask you, how would you define?
Oh, yeah, don't lose that. Give it to Patrick.
So first, I would like to ask you to define empowering education. What do you mean by empowering education?
Okay, empowering education to me is giving students the power to negotiate a life for themselves that's autonomous, that develops their potential, and that helps them just realize, who they want to be, and so I mean that's kind of a big picture, and what that means in terms of what skills do they need and what knowledge do they need when they come out of school. They need certain language skills. They need the language of negotiation, which is something that anybody can learn, but sometimes it has to be taught. It's not something that is naturally learned. A lot of people learn it through their lifestyle because they find themselves in situations where they meet strangers a lot, so they need to negotiate their way with them. And for people who don't have those sorts of experiences, they don't necessarily develop that language. And so it's a matter of having an opportunity to learn certain language skills. And, language and cognition are so tightly bound together that in the process of learning those language skills, there'll be certain cognitive development that takes place where comparisons, people be able to make comparisons, draw conclusions, reach generalizations, and all of that is kind of wound up in being able to do research in a way, not necessarily be part of a research project, but to kind of live your life as a person who encounters situations and then figures out what to do about them. And that sometimes means going out and getting information that's not necessarily right in front of you, and realizing those situations when they arise, that this is very John Dewey. But as much as people talk about, oh yes, John Dewey, progressive educator, oh yes, we need to do that, very few people do in the schools. So the language, the cognitive skills, and the interpersonal as well. The fact that schools don't necessarily address giving students opportunities to learn how to resolve interpersonal relationships. Children are very isolated from each other, from adults in the community. They may have one or two good buddies, but in a lot of situations they feel powerless, especially in schools where nobody particularly asks them what to do. They're mostly told. They're on the receiving end of all the decisions that are made. So they really don't get an opportunity to really practice figuring out how to deal with their personal problems as well. I mean, it's in schools tend to put that way down at the bottom of the list. They may have a counselor or two for 500 or 600 students. That doesn't deal with the interpersonal stuff at all. So that would be a third area, sort of. I mean, emotion and education are really closely tied, but we tend not to deal with that in our schools.
So is it fair to say that empowering education gets you to the stage when you are able to represent your interests or something like that?
Yes.
If it is yes, please say
yes.
it, because
yes.
I cannot say.
Yes. Empowering education helps you have what you need to get your needs met. And that would be working in your self-interest.
Now, as opposed to empowering education, what is domesticating education? How would you define this?
Domesticating education, I think, assumes that there's a certain structure to society, and that there are very few people that can go very far in education. And so the schools are set up to keep it that way, maintain the status quo, the hierarchy, the social structure. And I think pretty much all of the things that I've just said you need to have to be empowered are missing. You tend to assume that these are people who are not going to go very far educationally, and so you don't particularly bother to teach them what they need in terms of language, negotiation skills, problem solving, interpersonal relations. You just kind of try and control them because they've got to be there. The law says they have to be there, and you've got to just control them while they're there, because otherwise things could really get out of hand, and that's what you want to prevent as much as possible.
Well, I'm asking the obvious, but still, can you point out which segment of the population is getting empowering education, if there is a segment, and which segment is getting domesticating education?
Yes, the students that would get an empowering education would be students whose parents were themselves well educated, have a lot of cultural capital as well as economic resources, so they know what they want their children, what sort of education they want them to receive, and they will do whatever they have to. If it's a matter of putting them in a private school or taking whatever steps they need to be sure that the public school is working in their self-interest. And that's a very small percentage of the country, of the children in this country that get that. Very upper middle class, very upper middle class. By far, most children, not just working class, but working class and middle class, a lot of middle class children would get domesticating education. They would not be expected to be the CEOs or the people at the top professions. So they would be given an education, if they were middle class, an education that would be sure that they had enough of an income to get by, but not necessarily to fly high like people in the higher classes.
No, I know that you spent a lot of time in various classrooms observing what is going on, and can you give us some examples, some specific examples of instances of domesticating education in the classroom, whether consciously or unconsciously implemented on the kids?
Yes, domesticating education, what it looks like in a classroom is a lot of students sitting in rows facing the teacher's desk with a overhead projector on which the teacher is either writing things that the students are supposed to copy down or has written ahead of time on acetate, put on the overhead for the students to copy down, with the instruction that there will be a test at the end of the week. So sometimes they would also be told to read the chapter in the textbook, answer the questions at the end of the chapter. It's very teacher-directed. It's all about the teacher telling them what they need to know. to pass the test. There's a lot of pressure on teachers to teach to the test. Sometimes the acetates on the overhead will be sample questions from the test that they're expected to take. It's not interesting, and that's where the control factor comes in. The grade is used to try and control the students. And so they do have to learn this stuff on the acetates, so they will pass the test. If they don't pass the test, that's really the main thing that the teachers have to, hold over their heads. So they're not trying to motivate them to be interested in it. They're trying to say, if you want to survive, do this, and don't step out of line, don't deviate, just copy down and memorize what I've given you, because this is what's important. This is what you need to know to pass the test.
No, I don't know whether you encountered it, but what would be a classroom setting, the same thing, teaching kids on some subject in an empowering environment? How would it look like?
A classroom where students would be more likely to receive an empowering education. I observed one 7th or 8th grade social studies class where the teacher had gotten some kind of materials from Procter & Gamble. And they were interesting materials. They were things actually that a CEO might be interested in. Decisions that an executive in a corporation would be making, and the information that they would need to make those decisions, so that students would have some opportunities to kind of role play being an executive in a corporation. They would work in small groups. They would make decisions based on what they were learning. They would share their ideas with each other, and then have an opportunity to display those ideas to the teacher. So the materials would be different. Their interactions with each other would be different. Their interactions with the teacher would be quite different. Because in a domesticating classroom, you would not expect interactions between the students, even when the classroom is sometimes set up to look like small groups. There'll be 4 desks together in the classroom. But what they're doing is reading a chapter in a book and answering the questions at the end. And maybe they'll share the answers with each other to those questions at the end. But it's all, the Freudian banking concept, pouring the information in, making the deposits, so you can make the withdrawals later on the tests.
No, some people listening to this would say that, well, it's a very nice example with the Procter & Gamble decision making, but you would never get inner city kids being interested in this kind of education. That's why we need to tell them what to learn, because they are not interested. What would you say to these critics?
The criticism that inner city children just aren't interested in learning, which is something that you hear from very discouraged teachers who think they have tried everything that is possible to try, is a hard one to answer, because those teachers do have a very hard job. And they're in a situation where if they try and do something too different from what their colleagues and their administrator expects them to do, they do get criticized for it. So they're very often looking for an excuse not to try something new and interesting to the students. And this is a pretty handy excuse, because on the face of it, very often these children do not seem interested in learning. But I don't think that means that that's the situation. I think that means that's what it looks like on the surface. And until you get to know the students and really engage with them, you're going to keep thinking that. So there are just too many examples of teachers who have been successful in engaging urban students to make me think that criticism just doesn't hold up.
So what is under the surface then when you go under the surface? So these kids are as interested in learning than the other kids are? Are these kids as interested in learning? So what's under the surface? Because on the surface level, you're telling that they don't seem to be interested. Under the surface, are they as interested in learning as other kids from other?
They're definitely interested in learning, but they're not interested in copying notes off the board and memorizing. I mean, that works with a certain number of people. That worked with me. My mother was a school teacher. She raised me to succeed very well in that kind of system. But for people whose mothers weren't school teachers, an entirely different approach has to be used. I've done a lot of workshops with high school students, and they are very, very interested in things that are close to them. So you have to start where they are, and you can build out from there, but you have to get to know them first. You have to like them. You have to not be afraid of them or their parents. You have to respect them. You have to think that they have something of value. You have to be willing to learn from them as well as try and teach them. And you can engage them. It's just not going to work the way it works with people who've been raised by school teachers or, other middle class parents who raise their children to accept copying notes off the board or through a lecture or whatever and taking the test. So they do want to learn. I mean, they want to succeed. Their parents are desperate for them to succeed. But they're discouraged learners because they've had by the time they get to high school, they've had many years of this domesticating education. They don't trust the adults who are in front of them. They don't necessarily respect them because they're not getting respect back from them. I mean, it's a highly interpersonal thing, having a teaching-learning relationship with somebody. And if you don't make that interpersonal connection based on liking and trusting and respecting, you're going to have a very hard time figuring out how to engage them.
So, on the surface again, schools are interested in teaching students. Students are interested in learning. What goes wrong in the process?
Schools are interested in teaching, and students are interested in learning. Why isn't it happening? Well, because the schools are not supporting teachers who don't want to do domesticating education. Students are interested in learning, but they're not going to accept it from the teacher who doesn't try to engage them. They won't do it. No matter how disastrous it is for their future lives, they just will not learn from somebody who's not interpersonally relating to them.
You I know that you organized parents' workshops also. Why did you do that? What was the idea behind of organizing parents' workshop?
We thought that parents needed to be organized in order for their children's education to be more successful, because in the city there's a lot of even hostility between parents and teachers. Teachers have been under such fire for so long. They've put up a lot of barriers, and they've isolated themselves in defense. For generations, teachers, it's been put on the schools to solve social problems, and schools can't solve all the social problems, especially all the economic problems. There's so much poverty in inner cities. So in defense, the teachers have pulled back and have said, well, we are the experts here, and we don't need to listen to these parents. What do they know? They're not educated themselves. And parents, in defense, have pulled back and not tried to engage. And they do feel unempowered themselves. They feel like the teacher is the expert. Why aren't they educating my kid? It's up to them. It's not my job. What can I do about it? Where in many suburban areas, parents don't feel that way. They are educated, probably many times more educated than the teachers. They're certainly making more money often than the teachers, and they're quite happy to go into school and tell like it is and what they need from the teachers. So our thought was working class urban parents, if they can get themselves organized, they might be able to have an impact on the education of their children. And they can't be just, one or two angry people going in. They have to be a group of them to have any kind of impact. And they also need to have a different view of themselves in relation to their children's education. They need to know their child's first teacher, because all the research shows that the more parents are involved in education, the better students do. So we wanted to get the parents involved. That was our motivation.
Okay, so that was the idea behind it. How did it work in reality?
We organized our workshops around some of the principles that we have learned through the Alternatives to Violence Project, which is very focused on building community and trust. And so we would bring a group of 10 or 12 parents and one or two teachers. We tried to get an administrator, but very seldom were able to. And we spent quite a lot of time building community and trust. And we had a very diverse group of parents who did not socialize with each other or even interact with each other outside of the school. So we really had to overcome some barriers there. But this workshop format from the Alternatives to Violence Project is very effective at building community and trust. And we were able to do that, and in the process, show the parents some of the simple things that they could do at home with their children and make them feel empowered, make them understand they could also be working with their kids at home, even though they didn't necessarily have the greatest education themselves, didn't have a lot of educational skills. And they did start working at home. They were paid to come to our workshops. We were volunteers. We spent all of our money paying the parents and the teachers to come. So they had assignments to do at home with their children, and Patrick would yell at them if they didn't do their homework. But they did do their homework, and their homework really got them interacting with their children in a very different way than they had in the past, because they were teaching their children what they had learned in the workshop. And they also developed a different kind of relationship with the teachers that they got to know quite well in this setting, where we'd done this community building. I mean, the community building, a lot of it was like playing silly games. Everybody draws an animal out of a hat, and you want to put people into small groups. And you're told to find your group by making the sound that your animal makes. So you have 15 adults mooing and going quack, quack, and oink, oink to find their group. I mean, you know, really, really silly, childish things, but it breaks down barriers instantly. So in addition to the community building and the literacy activities that we taught them, we also talked about organizing, and we show video of some places where parents had gotten organized and had gotten some changes made, and talked about what were the barriers and how to overcome barriers to more involvement in the school. And then the school hired several of our more active parents, which is something that happens a lot, I've understood from other people. When you start working with parents, the school co-ops them, puts in
Hiring them for what?
lunchroom duty, teachers' aides. It's a way of co-opting them. It puts them in kind of a tough situation then when they want to go in with their other parents to talk to the principal about something. They don't have quite the freedom to express themselves as they would otherwise.
Okay, I just try to visualize and imagine how it happens. Okay, let's say that in a parents' workshop you got to the point where they realize that what their children are getting, domesticating education, and Patrick told us that they are getting the point. Mm-hmm. So after that, okay, they know what they are getting now. What is the next step? When you talk about organizing parents and going to the principals, how can they change a system which seems to be so universal?
That's a very long process. It's a very hard, long-term project to get from being part of a parent workshop to changing what goes on in the classroom. And they can't do it by themselves. And that's where the university and the teacher education programs need to come into it. So Patrick and I are also, besides working with the parents, we're also working with some ideas about how teacher education can change. Because parents and teachers are both equally disempowered by this system. And if parents and teachers could work together, real changes could happen. So you have to overcome the barriers of hostility and distrust between the parents and the teachers. And I've forgotten what the question was.
The question is, I'm a parent. I recognize that my kid is not getting an empowering education. Mm-hmm. What should I do? What is my next step?
Okay. In any organizing project, you have to have successes, and so you have to start where parents feel competent. And their first projects were around the food in the cafeteria. They feel very competent knowing what their children like and don't like, and knowing what the problems are with cafeteria food. So they were willing to get organized around that. And if we had been able to continue the project, We were also talking with them about the standards and the tests that their children would be taking at the end of the year. They were quite amazed to see that there were handouts that they hadn't gotten that explained what every third grader needs to know, what every fourth grader needs to know in each of the subject areas, what the tests will cover, and so on. With that sort of information, they could keep track better than they can otherwise of what their children are learning, if their children are being taught what is considered to be in the standards. But they couldn't individually address that. They would have had to, as a group, work on that. And we were not able to work with them long enough. I mean, we're talking long term here. And the next thing, if they could have gotten to the point where they could have formed alliances with the teachers, and I think we were beginning to break down some of those barriers by having the teachers and the parents in the same workshop. Lots of people go out and they do teacher workshops about parent involvement, and they do parent workshops, but they don't put them into the same workshop. And you really have to do that before they can begin to see how much they have in common. And I think that really, until parents and teachers can work together, it's going to be much harder to break that down. And then the third piece of it is the teacher education, the teacher educator, who has got to come, out of the ivory tower into the community, and not just, the school and leave when the teachers do, but into the community. And that is really a missing item in many, many places.
Well, what you're advocating obviously is empowering education for everyone. Now, is it in the interest of those who are in power to allow this to happen?
Should those who could those who are already in power benefit from empowering more people? If they looked at the cost of having an uneducated population, if they looked at the cost of prison, it's about $30,000 a year. 1 in 4 African American young men between the ages of 18 and 25 have encountered the criminal justice system in some way. They far outnumber the people in prison, the white people in prison. With education, there's always the hope that you wouldn't have that number of people in prison. So if they're looking at the bottom line, society pays a heck of a lot for prisons, for poor health, unemployment, welfare. I mean, that all adds up. Of course, if you have a lot of people saying, well, you don't really have to pay taxes, and then they vote those people into office, and then they just cut out even more of the institutions that keep society intact, then we're going to have more of the problems, and people who have a lot of money can isolate themselves and be safe, but that's a very small number of people. So you need an educated voter.
But hold on, before you proceed, shut it off a second.
I'm not sure I can articulate very precisely, but the question is that if the situation is like that a high percentage of the population is not getting empowering education, then the rest, are they really getting empowering education? I mean, empowering, you can use it in two different sense. One is them to be able to represent myself, my interest, to be able to be articulate and so on. But there is a higher meaning, for me, a higher meaning to empowerment. Empowering education is that we educate citizens to be democratic, open-minded, and open, and not to support a kind of class system. In this sense, can they get empowering education if the system is like that?
So even you're suggesting even people who get what I described as empowering education might not be empowered. But this is probably just a personal thing, but I do believe that if you really understand your own self-interest, you will understand you're not just an isolated individual. You're part of a social group, and you're not going to have a very comfortable life if you're in the midst of disarray, chaos, disorganization. It's in your self-interest to see that the whole group is empowered and is thriving. We have a very individualistic country here, and people do tend to think they're little islands that can save themselves and not worry about the rest of the group. But if they really get an empowered education, in my mind, they will understand that. They will have a more of a social perspective. And I don't think we want to go into it now, but John Dewey has a definition of democracy that very much includes that idea that you, if you're part of a social group, the boundaries between your group and other groups have to be lowered. That's part of his definition of democracy. They're permeable. You have to be able to move from group to group, or it's not a democracy. But again, who was John? People aren't paying any attention to John Dewey.
It's supposed to be.
Yeah, they say they are, but
yeah. Well, some of the studies on this kind of, I simplify, I think, class system were done back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and so on. So my question is, I guess, that it's a long process now, and some of the ills were recognized years and years ago. Is there any progress? Or it's getting worse?
you're asking whether the schools or society.
The school. I'm right now about the school system. I'm asking this question.
Whether there's been progress in a more equitable education.
Yeah.
I would say no. I think the standards movement, which is supposed to mean that everybody reaches the same standard or some minimal standard, pretty high standard, is the standards themselves are good, but their process for meeting them is to give all these tests, and so the tests are driving the teaching, not the standards themselves, and this focus on the test is actually making it worse, making the situation worse. There's less innovative teaching. Many fourth grade teachers have said, I don't want to teach fourth grade anymore, because at the end of fourth grade, there's this big test that gets published in the papers. And I have to spend all my time teaching to that test. That's not the way I want to teach. I'll teach third grade. I'll teach fifth grade. So it is test driven, and that's definitely down the wrong road. It's not improving the situation.
So I know that you believe that it can be changed, since you are doing so much work of trying to change it, but how optimistic are you in the short term, maybe even the long term?
How can it be fixed? Well, it can't be fixed by the schools alone. schools cannot address the issue of poverty, but teachers could do a whole lot better job of understanding things like the federal wage policy that has created this urban poverty. And there are educational reformers out there, Jean Anyon especially, who understands what educators need to get actively involved in. She calls for a new civil rights movement, a new economic rights movement. And just as the civil rights movement attempted to, had a big impact on the schools, an economic rights movement could also have a big impact on the schools. So we can't just say this is an educational problem. No, it's part of a big social problem. And the social problem is definitely impacted at the federal level by wage policy, tax policy, the big increase in the poor and the rich, and the loss of the middle class. That's federal policy that's driving that. And educators need to be involved. They can't sit back and say, well, that's not my problem. No, that is their problem. And so it's got to be another solution.
What I usually ask when I feel that I'm finished, I ask.
I mean, education could contribute to a more equitable and just society. It can't do it alone, but the sort of society that I would like to see, the pyramid would get flattened a lot. So there'd be more economic justice, more educational justice. Everybody's not going to be the same ever. But like I was saying, the federal wage, tax policy, interest policy, over 20 years since Ronald Reagan has gone a long way to making our society look like that. And we could squish it back down a little bit. It'd be a lot better.
Actually, I have a couple of questions.
I've already forgotten the first question.
First question, isn't it that it is supposed to be that way?
Oh, okay. Well, public schools, if you go back to Horace Mann, the idea was that the quality of education would be so good that everyone would send their children there. And it would be a common education, common schools. So I don't think originally it was set up to domesticate such a large percentage of the population. And I think certainly over the years, many educators have had very high ideals for the education system. But it does replicate society, and it does pretty much keep the social structure in place. I don't think we can blame the schools alone for that. The schools reflect society, and that's the way society has been controlled. So it's not too surprising that the schools have been controlled that same way, or used to control society. So in that sense, for the powers that be that want to keep the social structure the same, yes, they're doing a good job of using the schools for that. But there are just too many people who don't want it to be that way, to say that that's what they're supposed to be doing. No, that's not what they're supposed to be doing. And I've forgotten now.
The No Child Left Behind.
Oh, the No Child Left Behind legislation. That is so discouraging to me when I saw it, because Marian Wright Edelman of the Children's Defense Fund had a big campaign to do for education, kind of like what the War on Poverty had done many years ago. Really be sure that every child gets a good education. And the president comes along, steals her term, No Child Left Behind, comes up with a plan that is not going to give children empowering education because it's so heavily